Well, good morning. How are you all today? Here I am, eventually on a Friday. I love a Friday. I love Mondays and Fridays. In fact, I love all days, I think. Um, went down a bit of a rabbit hole there with some videos about Blaise Pascal, which I'm going to go back and watch. I've stuck them on my Obsidian watch list. It's great to keep control of these things. So here I am, a bit late on a Friday, but I think for the people who watch this, I don't think many watch it live. Maybe people do. Oh, Peter Wright's watching it live. Peter Wright's with me. What's going on? It's 10 a.m. I know it's just madness. I tell you, it's all madness. Morning, Peter. Good to see you. Well, see you type in the chat. I know I got lost when I went to the gym. So that was till 9 o'clock, and then came in here and set up the morning live, and then got lost in things, and here I am, kind of just now actually starting to go live. So here we are, and today I've noted there the title is the stress button, and this came into my head because I was watching Christine was out last night, so it was documentary night. Documentary night for me. When Christine's out, I watch dull documentaries that you wouldn't want to entertain. And the one I watched last night was called Live to 100. Secrets of the Blue Zones. Now, I've heard about the Blue Zones before. You might have heard about them yourself. These are geographic areas around the world where the rates of chronic disease are ridiculously low, and life expectancy is, on average, significantly longer than in lots of parts of the world. Many people living into their hundreds, and they're in odd places as well. Believe it or not, there's one in the United States, in California, and that surprises us, doesn't it? I suppose because we think, and it goes into this in the show, that that we think of America as being maybe a predominantly overweight country, and then they say that the American guy who's hosting the show says that they've got higher rates of all these kind of conditions. But in Loma Linda, it's one of these blue zones, and there's one in Greece, there's one in Costa Rica, one in Italy. There's a one in Japan which is disputed, and it's disputed because, as a consequence of the war, all the birth records of that whole kind of generation got lost, so they can't really confirm. But they were showing these people going about their business, and they looked old. You know what I mean? But they look very well on it as well. So these blue zones are interesting, and he's exploring what it is about these places. And interestingly, obviously, we talk about diet, and he looks at the diets in these places, and they're what you'd expect. You know what I mean? No processed food, everything from scratch, high in fiber, high in legumes, and high in fibrous vegetables and that kind of thing, with very little meat. And as I said, no processed food. So it's interesting. I'm only on episode 2, so there might be more of that as it comes. So it was interesting to look at it from that nutrition point of view. But the one thing that really interested me was there was a woman on the show. I really must remember these people's names, but I was enjoying watching the show without my notebook. So there was a woman talking about stress, and as you know, you'll have heard it before: fight or flight response. Fight, fight or freeze. It's a natural mechanism that kind of keeps us safe. And the interesting thing about it is that our amygdala has responded by flooding our bodies with, in the main, adrenaline and cortisol, but with other things. It's responded subconsciously before we're cognitively aware that there's a risk. So our body is moving itself, preparing itself, moving itself into fight or flight response because we have perceived subconsciously something in the environment that may be threatening. And that's really interesting, isn't it? So why is that? Well, that's because we're the survivors. From an evolutionary perspective, we're the survivors. The people who didn't survive are the ones who heard a rustling in the undergrowth and went and had a look and thought, well, I wonder what that was. And then boom, the tiger jumps, the saber-toothed tiger jumps out and eats them, or the woolly mammoth tramples them, or the rival tribe who are hiding out in the bushes attack them and kill them, or whatever. The survivors, us, we were running while we were going, I wonder what we're running for. We'll best check, but we're running. Not quite, but kind of, you get the idea. We're running while we think about cognitively think about what the problem might be. So our stress response is already activated. And that's why I talk about all the things about dampening down our stress response with things like the Shakti mat and cold showers and meditation and all that kind of stuff. It just helps us not let our stress response get out of control, because it's going to be triggered before we can cognitively get in the way of it. So if we can kind of manage that in such a way that we don't let it, once triggered, get out of control, then we're going to do better. We're not going to get quickly emotional. We're going to kind of stay pragmatic about things. It's that Viktor Frankl thing between stimulus and response. There's a gap where we have to try and get in there and figure out what our appropriate response is. Because if we don't get in there and figure it out, then we end up with an emotional response. Anyway, what this woman said was, stress is a button that the brain presses that acts as a default mechanism to adapt to the worst case scenario. So that the brain presses this button and makes a decision about what the worst case scenario is in these circumstances, and deals with it biologically from that position. But as you know, when we're doing things, those report writers among us, those spreadsheet analyzers, those people that sit in meetings, all of those people, what you know is that the interpretation of what this could mean for us in terms of a worst case scenario, it's not going to be that bad, is it? There certainly aren't going to be saber-toothed tigers or woolly mammoths. We're certainly not going to be killed in a meeting or while we write a report. But if we're not careful, our stress response goes into full overdrive. Because our biological bodies don't quite understand the world that we're living in, do they? We're not prepared for this world from a biological point of view. And what's interesting, when we hit this stress mechanism that adapts us to the potential worst case scenario, we get a spike in blood glucose and a spike in inflammatory markers. Now, the two things we know about them is a spike in glucose. There are connections there with weight gain and what have you. So there's that angle. And the inflammatory markers, what we know is, if our bodies remain inflamed, if our brains remain inflamed at a cellular level, that can lead to low mood. It can lead to depression, and there are all sorts of things that create these inflammatory markers. Diet being one of them, given that we're talking about these blue zones. Processed food, that kind of stuff, that all does it. Now, what the woman was saying was, this is beneficial in the short term. So if you are wounded and running away from an animal that's wanting to kill you, the fact that I don't know the biological mechanism, but what she was saying was the fact that there's this inflammation is good. I'm assuming, she didn't go into detail and I haven't looked it up, but I'm assuming, it'll stop blood flow, coagulation of blood flow and all those kind of things, protects the area. The inflammation doesn't protect the area that's damaged. So in the short term, this mechanism is really good for us. But again, we're not often running away from things with huge gashes in our torsos or legs or arms, are we? Unless you're the knight in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Then that'd be really useful, wouldn't it? To be inflamed, it is but a scratch. In the long term, though, you imagine glucose spiked, inflamed, negative effects. So she got on talking about stress, which is really interesting. So the point of that is, we've got to try and mitigate against those things. And actually, adrenaline and cortisol are toxic to our bodies as well. But Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score tells us that, a classic book. The body will keep the score of the stress. Our physical bodies will manifest within that context, illness, inflammation and spiked glucose is linked to cardiovascular disease and all that kind of thing. So she said that stress is beneficial if we overcome it by active coping. Stress is beneficial if we overcome it by active coping. So if we get something in our world that stresses us, this is where some stress is good. Not long-term stress, but some stress is good. So if something happens to us and it makes us a bit stressed, and we overcome it by engaging with it, by actively coping with it ourselves, then we become able to manage and deal with stress more effectively. So it's no good protecting children, for example, from all manner of stress and giving them a sugar-coated cotton candy kind of world, because they have to be stressed out a little bit. And there's some interesting reading around this. I'll share some books maybe in the notes underneath this. Some interesting books around this, looking at some of the problems that younger people are experiencing and showing how it's a problem of the world. It's not them that are at fault. It's not them that are, able to kind of face up to the world. It's that the world has created a certain type of mindset because we protect our children too much often, so it's good to let them kind of take risks. I mean, when I was growing up, my mum would send me out on a morning and tell me just to come back when I was hungry, and I'd go off and you tested the boundaries. You went a little bit further. I went over Kaya Bogs, or I went down the cycle track, towards Stanley, and I go a little bit further and I think, I'm too far now. So we tested out the boundaries. And one of the problems is sometimes, because now play is quite controlled for a lot of children, it happens in particular places and they're taken there by parents and all those kind of things. They don't, they haven't effectively understood how to mitigate and manage risk. Anyway, that's a sideline, but there's some interesting books on that out there. And what she said was, in this world where we're brought all of the world's problems through social media, it's creating this mental health crisis, because we're brought all of these problems that we can't overcome by active coping. We're never going to overcome them, but we're almost forced to witness them, because we're bombarded with it. News channels, Twitter feeds, I watch all these things. I'm involved in all these things as well, but we're bombarded by these things. But the only thing you can control is what's going on in your world. That's all you can control. We can have views and we can exercise our right to a voice, I suppose, politically. But we can't overcome all of these all the world's problems all at once. And I think that's the point, isn't it? We all enjoy being politically active. We've all got our projects that we're interested in and involved in, and try to do our bit. For me, I suppose it's the environment. It's that kind of thing. I'm interested in that. Poverty, alleviating poverty. That's an interest as well. But interestingly, and again, this is a self-reflection bit. I suppose I don't do much beyond talk about it with the people that I know and try and understand it and try and have conversations, particularly about the environment. Try and have conversations with individuals about the impact on the environment. And being vegetarian, that's one way that I can have that. Why are you vegetarian? Well, it's the environmental impact. So I can work at that individual level with people, and I can have a voice, can't I, politically, and I can lobby my politicians and all that kind of stuff. So I can do that. But the point is, this stress has been caused to us because we end up with all the world's problems, and we can't actively cope with them, but we can actively cope with what's going on. And what she was saying was that by resolving things in our near world, resolving what you're given to resolve within your sphere, within your bubble, within your micro world, I suppose, is an important part of good mental health cognitive longevity, which is where it connects to the blue zone thing. Why are these people in these blue zones as well? It's not just that they've got less heart disease, it's they get much less levels of dementia. So good mental health, cognitive longevity, and resilience to stress. Because what you've done is, in your micro near world, you've understood that when something's stressful, you can apply yourself to that task and overcome it. If you are constantly being stressed by things that you can't overcome because they're not yours, or they're too big, or they're massive, or whatever, if you can't do that, then you're not using your active coping and you become overwhelmed by these problems. I don't know where that leaves us, though, because there are problems in the world that we need to kind of be active about. So that's kind of where I'm going to leave that. I wonder where that is. I'm going to go and have a think about that. I'm going to see how that resolves itself, because one of the problems of this world we live in, this person-centered world, is that we don't become actively, or lots of people anyway, don't become actively involved in transformation at a societal level. So I'm not sure where that leaves us with that. It's an interesting thing to think about. But certainly in terms of stress, it gives us a problem when we become overwhelmed by the problems of the world. I must admit, I've stopped watching the news. I still read the news, but I've stopped watching it because I used to get frustrated by it. So maybe there are different ways to do things that don't affect our stress levels quite as much. So go and see what's going on. And when you feel stressed about something, see how you can overcome it by active coping. Is it your thing to overcome? Is it not your thing to overcome? And sometimes we have to observe things, observe the problems with detachment, I suppose, so that they don't overwhelm us. And I think by stepping back from things, we can sometimes see what we can do about the problems of the world, as well as our personal world problems. There you go. Interesting, really interesting. I'm going to watch more of it and report back. And as ever, these shorts on the morning are getting even longer as we approach 18 minutes in the middle of the morning. Anyway, I'm going to go off. I've got a portfolio to finish for my hypnotherapy course. So I'm going to go off and do that. And I need to get that finished today. Not far off. I'm nearly there. Still got plenty of slippage. Still got 2 weeks. But I'm going to get it finished today. And then it's done. So thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for hanging out with me, Pete. Good to see you. Looks like you're still there. And I'll catch up with everybody else soon. Take care. Have good weekends. And remember, this Friday is the most important day of next week. Take care.